Yes,
Okay,
going live now.
nice. All right. So at 5:03, I'm calling to order the Finance Committee for today, September 23rd. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett.
I am here.
Councillor Lindell. Councillor Faulkner. Councillor Lee Garcia.
Here.
Chair Romero Worth.
I am here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, we have next approval of the agenda. Are there changes to our agenda tonight?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
Okay, if there are no changes from the committee, can I get a motion?
To approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We're on to the consent agenda. We have a number of items that have been pulled from consent. Maybe I'm going to let you do this because I don't know if there's been others.
Certainly, Madam Chair. We have item I, item N, item O, item P, and item Q that were removed for discussion.
Okay, great. And in addition, I would like to move item P, which is the resolution on the Soldiers Monument, to be the last consent item that we hear. So I'm going to move it after Q, I guess after Q, right? Okay.
Second.
Actually, I need a motion.
Motion to approve is amended.
Second.
Okay. And that includes moving the Soldiers Monument to the end. Okay, great. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We do not have any presentations tonight, so we're going to jump right in to our consent items. The first one is item I, request for approval of professional services contract with IT Connect for program management, utility billing modernization, and business process support in the total amount of $4,390,681.50 for a term of 2 years. We have Nancy Jimenez, our utility billing division director, with us. And I believe Councilors Cassett and Lindell pulled this. Do you want to dive right in? You want her to introduce the item? How do you want to do this?
Just dive.
Okay, we're going to dive right in, and I'll let you two flip a coin. All right, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councilor Cassett. Thanks for being here, Nancy, Ms. Jimenez. Just tell me how this interfaces with the other consultants and things that we have struggled so long with in this process, because it's been a really long process and it's been a really expensive one, and it's always been based in somehow being deficient in IT. And correct me if I'm wrong about that. So tell me how all of this interfaces and how it works so that I feel good about it.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you all. So yes, this has been a long 10, 12-year project. It started in 2013. For the last 5 years that I've been with utility billing, we have tried it several different ways. IT Connect is what I hope, and what's in the contract is the program management of the whole process. So they're going to coordinate with City of Santa Fe utilities. They're going to coordinate with IT. They're going to coordinate with Advanced, which is the system that we're still trying to get the billing system, up and going. What we found over the last several years is I have a job, right, as the utility billing division director, and that takes more than 40 hours a week, as we all know. It's probably 80 or 90 for every single person at the city. And what we found is that's not feasible for me to then coordinate a big, huge project, right? and things get dropped and things get, pushed. And then, of course, that means that there's more money. And so, we hire a consulting firm, IT Connect, that has program manager, and they have specialized individuals that can help with testing and get everybody up to the training aspect of, of the new system. They make sure that the IV&V that we went through about a year ago, that all of those are being followed, that anything that IT needs to do, they're on top of it. And really, they're in collaboration with me, but so that we can make sure that nothing is getting dropped. I can still, potentially concentrate on the day-to-day stuff for the utility and for the division, and my employees and, everything else that goes along with that, but have sort of a second individual that will also, say, okay, this deadline's coming up, we got to meet it. What do we need to do so that they can basically not necessarily redirect, but make sure that we're all on the same page. As you stated, Counselor, we have had numerous individual issues with our IT department. They are just as much overworked and underemployed, with staffing as anybody else is in the city. So I can't put blame on, any one department or any one division, but it is what it is, and we've kind of fought this throughout. There are some things that I will tell you, I do not have the expertise in IT. I will tell you, IT may not have the expertise in utilities, so that is why we have this third-party company to keep us on track with all of the contractors that we may have, all of the deadlines, and really that is strictly their scope of work to make sure that we all stay on track. And they will then say, nope, there's an issue. We need to heighten this. We need to go to, whoever we need to do. If individuals maybe aren't listening to me, they can then go to the next step and say, Nancy's, said this. We're now coming to you as a third-party contractor with the same information, and we're taking it to the next level. So, it is a little bit of a change where the city's tried to do things in-house, probably to the detriment of the city many times. And so that is what this contract and these individuals will do. The program manager, you've probably already met. She is in the back of the office or back of the room if you have any specific questions, but it really is to have a second and third eye on the project, so that we can, move it forward and finally, hopefully, get it completed in the, in the required 2 years.
So we still have a pretty sizable contract with, what's the name of them? Something River out of, pardon? Mountain River? Is that the name of them?
So we have a
River.
current contract that only has about $3,000 left on it. It has not been activated or used since December of last year of 2023. So the contract is active, but right now we don't believe that we need their services. If, however, though, IT can't help me with the conversion of our current 24-year-old system, getting it all of the information from that system into the advanced system, I can't tell you, I can't not tell you either way that I may not be coming forward with additional IT assistance. I'm not saying that it's Mountain River, it might be a different company, but in theory, there is a contract that we have not activated for this fiscal year. It does theoretically expire June 30th of 2025, but we have, in theory, used all of the money that was allocated for that 4-year contract. So it would need to come back to all 3 committees for any extension of time and or extension of money.
So this is a 2-year contract and what's our timeline for conversion to advance? Are we thinking we can have that conversion done within this 2-year timeline that these guys are consulting?
Yes, ma'am. Again, I always put a timeline, and then unfortunately in the past, it's never been met. We do per I'm not even going to say promise. We hope that everything will be done in 14 months once we get started. We did do a 24-month contract with IT just to make sure that, you know, after the system is up and running, that we have the training program and we have the IT and we have the infrastructure and we have the maintenance also all ready to go. So we did do a 24-month contract with IT to make sure that we get the system done in 14 months and that we have a little bit of a buffer to make sure that we're still running smoothly for a couple of months after that.
Was this, put out as a RFP?
No, IT Connect is on state price agreement.
So we didn't, take bids or interview other people, we just took them?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
How do we know that they really had the expertise to do this?
Unfortunately, that was not my decision. IT assisted with getting us the contract or showing us the IT Connect company. So I can definitely say after the last year that we've been working with IT Connect on other items throughout the utility department, I'm strongly impressed and very happy that I have IT Connect on board and that, yes, I am 100% sure that it can happen through the IT Connect contract.
Good. And just I just have this nagging voice in my head that I don't like doing $4 million contracts when we don't interview more than one company and we take them on just because they have a state contract. That's nothing to do with you. I just get concerned. These are large dollar contracts. How many people do we have from this company working with us, and are they full-time?
Right now, currently, we have 2, but in the plan, we have other individuals that will be coming on board either as part-time or full-time to help assist with the setting up of the billing system. We'll have some project administrators. We will have some testers. We will have, you know, there's quite a few positions outlined in the contract. And again, it'll just be whether we need them full-time or part-time. So there's a mixture of some of both.
Um, Chair, I'll yield the floor, but I may have questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
Of course.
thank you, Counselor. Counselor Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Nancy, for being here. Councilor Lindell really hit on a lot of what raised my eyebrows at this. I am trying to understand why this is such a high contract for only 2 years. And so understanding how many individuals we have, what is that hourly rate? Is there that somewhere in the contract that I've missed? I saw the, you know, the education experience required. I don't recall seeing how we got to this number.
Yeah, so there's an estimate, and I'm sorry, my page numbers are not the same as the packet page numbers, but there is an estimate for year 1 and year 2 and the specific positions, and then of course the travel that's required. And it is after,
Page 49 of 55 in our packet, I believe.
Oh, I have one on 45,
They keep
46, 47.
It's an hour. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. And where's travel coming from?
depending on where the individuals live, some are, well, there's a couple from Texas, there's one from North Carolina. We really do try and find, and IT connects with most highly sought after individuals, but they may be, you know, working from a different state. So when we do need them to travel to Santa Fe, then those would be the travel costs that we would need to pay. And again, I'm not necessarily expecting to spend this whole amount. You try to guesstimate the highest. I'm certainly hoping that travel won't be, as large, but again, we also don't, Counselor Lindell, probably of all of you, if I come back every month, it's a little,
We
a
recall,
little
yes.
crazy.
we do.
So we do, kind of set up worst case scenario or try to set up worst case scenario so that, if there's savings in the contract, believe me, I will be the first one. I'm pretty stickler with charges and, what they're billing me for and things like that.
Right, yeah, no, we are aware, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I would agree with Councilor Lindell. I think, this is such a high contract amount to not have gone out to RFP is concerning and also part of our procurement code. So that's something for us to think about in terms of our policies, but
How we look at it, I don't know if this will help, but how we look at state price agreement is they did go through an RFP process. Yes, it was with the state. Yes, there are, 5 contractors or vendors that are available through state price agreement. There
Mhm.
might have been 6 different companies that we could look at through the state price agreement, and IT Connect was the one that was chosen. So, not that it didn't go out for RFP, you're right, it didn't go through the city's RFP process.
but it did at the state level.
It went through the state, and we use the state price agreement throughout the city for almost everything that's possible because RFPs for the city, unfortunately, it would take like 6 months. And it just adds on and more, more costs and more time and things like that to even start the project, let alone try and get a 10-year project, finalized.
Right, that does make sense in terms of, I know it is a heavy lift and we see that at the city.
Yeah, and again, it's not the city's RFP, but we have to follow the state procurement, which,
Code, right.
even when we do an RFP, it's still through the state price agreement procurement process and, RFPs or bids or anything like that. So it is vetted, sort of double, through the state and then through our process with Travis and Emily and her crew.
Okay. Well, as I said, Councilor Lindell covered most of what I had, so I'll hop over to you again. Well, I'm not sure. Well,
Before I go back to you, Counselor Lindell, do others of you want to, is that all right? Okay, Counselor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we had quite a good discussion for Public Works and Utilities over this. Yeah, the amounts are concerning. However, I think that we've already kind of been, just seems like banging our head against the wall. We need to get this done. If IT Connect is the company to help us do this, then I think that we do need to invest. But I really like to look at benchmarks and see where we are through the process. I think one of the major concerns I had or biggest concerns I have is our current staff in your department. Obviously there's going to be a lot of training involved throughout this process because the last thing we need to do is have IT Connect come in, help us implement this, and then we don't have a future plan in regards to keeping it going. And so the question would be is where are our staff levels that would be able to help in getting trained on this? And are you looking at additional staffing to also get trained in the future to manage this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Counselor. So right now I have 9 vacancies within my division. I do have 29 positions. So we are, always looking for individuals. At this point, I have 3 vacant customer service reps, and those are the individuals that get the paperwork at the very beginning and just kind of start the whole process. We do have a list of eligibles with 5 individuals on that. So I do hope that I could hire maybe 2 out of those 5, maybe all 3. And I do have a couple of vacant positions that I have left purposely open and not hired, knowing or hoping that this billing system would get, finalized so that then I could take those vacant positions that I have and make sure that what I need for the new billing system, a trainer, an IT assistant, whatever that is, then I would be able to reclassify those positions into what I definitely will need as a consistent trainer. You know, probably an additional IT support. I don't want IT to be like the full, everything's on their shoulders, you know, there needs to be some kind of interaction between my division and the IT section or division. So there will be potentially the opportunity for us to reclassify some positions. If we do need, you know, different positions or new positions, then of course we would, you know, potentially ask for that in either during the budget cycle or, you know, come July when we're closer to having an end point of our billing system and what we need to make sure that we maintain this and not have to keep IT on contract for, excuse me, for training or for, you know, maintenance or anything like that so that we can handle it in-house.
That would be my concern too, is like we staff and then we're not capable of doing it and we're still going out for support and the costs will continue and now it's more staff plus more contracts plus. And so that's what I would really like to try to make sure we have a good plan. And, you know, from my perspective, a request to maybe lay out your plan, how this is going to go through your department, whether it's your organizational chart and your future of what you're foreseeing as far as being able to sustain this program once it's fully implemented.
Of course, yes.
Counselor Littendale?
One quick question.
Yes.
So are they on a existing contract with us right now?
IT Connect for me is not on an existing contract. I'm not sure if IT has one with IT Connect or not.
So how are they working now?
She's not working. She's just here if there were questions that needed to happen.
We don't have IT Connect working and billing right now.
Not on this system. No, ma'am.
So like,
Director Oster, can you just speak briefly to the price agreements and the fact that they are things that we use and they are part of the procurement code, just to confirm?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. Nancy did a good job of describing it. So our procurement policy does allow the use of statewide price agreements, and we also recently have started putting in place some citywide price agreements. Safeware is one that recently came through for us to purchase safety equipment. So what that is, it's a form of cooperative procurement, which is, it goes through a competitive process, like Nancy said. So there is an RFP that's done and vendors are awarded off of that RFP, and then multiple entities can utilize that award. So it is done through a competitive process, and it's very common. We use price agreements a lot because, as Nancy said, it's time consuming to do our own RFPs. So, you know, if there isn't already a price agreement in place for what we need, or, you know, there's a lot of other reasons that we might choose to do an RFP, but usually we look first to statewide price agreements and, you know, price agreements that we already have in place for the city, or that other cooperative organizations like CES is a common one that we use a lot, so that we can leverage that, that efficiency for one, but also the collective purchasing power will often result in better pricing because they're looking at, you know, for example, with CES, all of the school districts in the state are purchasing through those contracts. So the volume is based on all of the schools rather than just one district or one school. So I think, you know, I just want to circle back on statewide price agreements are allowed under our procurement policy, and they are common, and it is a form of competitive procurement.
Thank you. All right. If there are no other questions, what's the pleasure of the committee?
To approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item, and I would just note Councilor Lee Garcia did flag that we had a conversation about this at Public Works and Public Utilities on Monday. No, is it Monday? No, today's Monday. Last Monday. There we go. And if, you know, if any of the councilors are interested in that, just want to flag that. All right. With that, we need a roll call, I guess.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Great night.
Okay, item N, request for approval of fiscal agent banking services agreement with Wells Fargo Bank N.A. in the amount of, looks like 1 million for fiscal year 2025. And who is going to handle this tonight? Is that you, Director Oster? Okay, because I don't see the people listed on the agenda in the room. And I think Counselors Cassett and Lindell pulled this item. Again, do you want any kind of lead up to this, or do you just want to dive right in? All right, and one of you wants to start? Counselor Cassett.
I actually, maybe I do want a little bit of a lead up into this. And one of the reasons that I pulled this is and maybe I'm just missing it from the past, but is this something new for us? I don't recall seeing these types of contracts with Wells Fargo in the past. I know we've been using Wells Fargo for quite some time, at least as long as I've been here. So actually, I think I would benefit from some background information from you, Director Oster.
Certainly, Madam Chair, and thank you, Counselor Cassett. So the city is currently utilizing Wells Fargo as our fiscal agent bank. We have been on a carryover from a previous contract. There was a procurement done in 2022 that didn't result in a contract being awarded. So we are anxious to get a contract in place with Wells Fargo.
I'm sorry. So we've been on, can you go through that again? We had a procurement 2022. Did not result in a contract, but we selected Wells Fargo at that time. Can you clarify that piece for me?
Sure, certainly, Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett. So the bank, Wells Fargo Bank, has been the city's fiscal agent for decades, very, very long time.
Right.
So in 2022, the city did an RFP and attempted to negotiate a contract, but that didn't come to fruition. There was an issue with timing, and by the time the terms had been agreed to, it was too long after the RFP had been issued. So since 2022, we've been utilizing the carryover provision in the old contract to continue the services. Now, we're anxious to get a new contract in place.
Okay, thank you. And so is that why we haven't been seeing, or maybe I'm just forgetting about them, the master banking services agreement every single year? So it's $1 million per year. Is that about what we've been paying recently, or been paying more or
Madam
less?
Chair and Councilor Cassett, yes, that's an estimate based on our fees for calendar year 2023.
Okay, so we paid this both in 2023. So are we on a calendar or on a fiscal year for this? Because this is saying fiscal year 25, I believe.
Madam Chair, I apologize. Yes, you're correct. Fiscal year.
Okay, so we did this fiscal year 23 as well as 24 and then now we're just going forward with a new contract on fiscal year 25.
And Madam Chair, that's correct. So in 2022, the contract didn't get in place in time after the RFP was issued. So we needed to start a new procurement process. The city had issued a procurement and, had issued an RFP and made a selection. But as I said, that didn't result in a contract. This new proposed contract is based on a contract out of Farmington that allows other entities to utilize that procurement. So that contract was just recently executed. And when that contract went into effect, we have the ability to then utilize that as our procurement method.
Okay. All right. Got it. And I see that we can renew it up for 9 years. So it'll be an annual.
Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett, the initial term is for 5 years.
That's not what I'm seeing The agreement's initial term extends until April 30th, 2025, with the option to renew for up to an additional 9 years. Is that Farmington's?
Excuse me.
I'm
Madam
looking
Chair,
at the
I'm sorry.
memo.
I apologize. That's correct.
Okay. So our first one will go to April 30th, 2025, and then after that, we'll be doing an annual renewal.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarity and no further questions at this time.
Counselor Lindell?
Um, I, I've had meaningful conversation about this today with Ms. Oster, and, I'm not very comfortable with this, for several reasons. I was here when we worked that other contract and it was, didn't go into effect, and there were a lot of questions about that because at that time, Wells Fargo was involved in a pretty sizable scandal that that resulted in a $3 billion fine for them, which is pretty lot of money. And one of the issues that I have with this contract is I don't see Wells Fargo being much of a community partner to us. I don't see that they participate as a member of the community of Santa Fe. Which I think that we have some other banks that really participate as a community partner with us. I realize that we need to do this and get it done, but I don't want to see this just roll over and get renewed every year for 9 years. I'm really, really uncomfortable with that. And I know that we went out on a state, I believe, state price agreement somehow with the city of Farmington, using their price agreement. Is that right?
Madam Chair and Councillor Lindell, so this is utilizing the City of Farmington contract to enter into a master banking services agreement to provide banking and treasury management services. So the City of Farmington issued an RFP that allowed other entities to utilize that procurement.
It may be that the city of Santa Fe has different options than what the city of Farmington had in terms of responding to that RFP. I would really like to see us make a commitment to put this out for RFP, make a commitment to put it out for RFP next year or the year after. I don't really want to see us just continue to roll over a contract with Wells Fargo for 9 years. That we may have entities in town that would be able to service us as well as Wells Fargo, and also may be a better community partner to us than Wells Fargo. So that's, I talked with Ms. Oster earlier today, and you know, that's something that I'm asking for in this. And I know that she contacted Wells Fargo and explained to them that there is concern that they haven't been much of a community partner with us. And you know, I think we need to get this done. We need a contract, and but I don't want to do it for 9 years. So I don't know what our options are with that or what we can do with that, but that's where I sit with it. I think probably back when the original contract came around to us, I think I probably was a no vote on that at the time because we were involved in that scandal of opening bank accounts for people that didn't open them. So I don't know what our options are, but that's where I'm at with this.
You done?
I'm DUN done.
DUN done. Counselor Faulkner.
To concur with Counselor Lindell, I'm not comfortable going in for a 9-year option as well. I think some of these things should go to bid. I do think there are also other banks in New Mexico that would be better partners to the city of Santa Fe and the community of Santa Fe. So I'd like to look into how we could figure out how we don't get locked into a 9-year option.
So one of the reasons we have been going with Wells Fargo is they have, by state law, there's a collateral provision, and they are one of the banks that can do that. Are there others? Are we clear about whether there are other banks that can meet the state law collateral provisions?
Madam Chair, and members of the committee, so that is definitely a challenge for the smaller banks. The state law requires our deposits to be collateralized at 51%. So, earlier this summer, we had $80 million on deposit with Wells Fargo, so that would require about $45 million of collateral. And some smaller banks may struggle to meet that requirement. We actually had 2 audit findings related to one of our local banks that the city had some money with in terms of complying with those state requirements for collateral. So I do want to say that this price agreement that the city of Farmington established was established through an RFP process. And it was just awarded on August 14th, so that was very recent. In addition, and I apologize for my misstatement earlier, this contract actually only goes till April 30th of 2025, and then requires an annual renewal every year for those remaining years. So this would come back before you every year for that renewal for consideration. So in addition, I would highlight that the Wells Fargo Bank provides us with a broad range of services. We have checking and traditional banking services through Wells Fargo Bank. They also administer our procurement card program. We have investments through Principal Financial Group that are done through a partnership with Wells Fargo. They provide us with a broad array of services which are essential to the functioning of the city. The city absolutely must have a fiscal agent in order to function, and Wells Fargo is able to provide us with a broad range of services. In terms of community investment, like Councilor Lindell mentioned, I did speak with our relationship manager at Wells Fargo and let him know that is something that is important to us. He did provide me with some information about Wells Fargo's philanthropy here in New Mexico. In 2023, Wells Fargo invested roughly $4.3 million in New Mexico in support of housing, small business, financial health, and sustainability, as well as other programs. New Mexico Wells Fargo employees also volunteered more than 300 hours of time to philanthropic organizations in the state of New Mexico. I have asked if we can get examples of any projects in Santa Fe that demonstrate that commitment that the bank has to charitable contributions, both of funding and of time, to the local community. And I did emphasize to the bank when I spoke with them this afternoon that that's something that is very important and that we want to see them be more visible and more active in terms of their philanthropy here within the city of Santa Fe. So Mr. Jensen, our relationship manager, is going to connect me up with their coordinator for the state of New Mexico that manages these philanthropic programs. and provide me with information about those so that we can share that with our local nonprofit partners and hopefully get them more funding, through these programs that Wells Fargo has. A couple of other things, in particular, Wells Fargo has invested heavily in native-led new nonprofits in New Mexico. In 2023, they awarded $2.6 million to tribal entities working in the area of housing. They also are participating in a program called Invest Native, which is a 2-year, $20 million philanthropic initiative that focuses on Native American efforts to strengthen access to housing, small business growth, financial health, and sustainability in Native communities. So, I think they're doing some things here in New Mexico, and I did emphasize to our relationship manager there at Wells Fargo that we want to see them doing more here locally in Santa Fe as, part of our relationship as it continues to evolve if this contract is approved. Looking here, they also were part of a $37 million community lending and investment capital effort that delivered 126 units of affordable housing in New Mexico in 2023. So I do believe that the bank does participate in philanthropic and charitable efforts in New Mexico. And I believe that they are committed to demonstrating that more visibly here in Santa Fe.
Okay, just a couple quick questions. So when we went out to RFP, is one of the criteria for the RFP the ability to collateralize at the level that the state requires?
Madam Chair, yes, the RFP that we issued required that the bank be able to meet the requirements of the state law. And the RFP that Farmington issued did as well.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this. So it wasn't our RFP, it was Farmington's RFP that we are taking advantage of. So we don't know who else in the state finished meeting, if there were other bidders to the RFP that would meet the requirements. We don't know that.
Madam Chair, the city of Farmington did the RFP and they established a price agreement, which resulted in this master banking services agreement, which we're seeking to leverage.
Right. So through that process, we don't know if and which other banks might be able to service us given the state's collateral requirements.
Madam Chair, I think that's correct. I think Councilor Lindell raised a good point that Farmington has different banks than we do here in Santa Fe.
Okay, and the procurement card, is that the gas cards, the P cards, or is that something different?
Madam Chair, no, the WEX cards are different. The P card is what we use to purchase non-gas items.
Okay,
Office supply.
right. And like if we're throwing a community event and we need cups and that kind of thing.
Travel as well.
And you said they also provide investment services, or we're doing, explain that again?
Madam Chair, we use Principal Financial Group through our partnership with Wells Fargo for some of our investments.
But those two things, the P card or the procurement card and the principal finance, that's not part of this contract. That's as a result of our relationship with them, we get access to this sort of like I don't know, I won't even.
Madam Chair, all of this agreement covers all of the services that
Okay.
Wells Fargo's provided.
So these two, okay. So if we wanted to conduct our own RFP, let's say in a year or two, I mean, that's possible, right? I mean, do we have capacity to do that? I'm assuming we do.
Madam Chair, we can do our own RFP at any time. So that nothing, executing this contract would not preclude us from later issuing our own RFP. And under this agreement, there will be an annual renewal. So that each of those renewals, and at any time in between them, the city could choose to issue an RFP, and then, change at that point, change fiscal agent.
Right, so we wouldn't have to breach this contract in order to, because it's for a total of 9 years, but we approve it year to year, we could change if we found somebody else who could meet our needs.
And Madam Chair, so the contract that we're requesting approval for now, the term ends on April 30th of 2025. It does have an option to renew for up to 9 additional years. But each of those contracts, the renewals would come back through governing body.
So, but I guess it is an open question, which we would only really be able to satisfy with doing our own RFP, whether there is another bank that can meet the collateral provisions. For sure.
Madam Chair, the city did its own RFP in 2022, and the selection was Wells Fargo, but the contract negotiations weren't completed in the required amount of time. So in answer to your question, yes, the city could choose to do an RFP, and then we would know for sure which bidders were able to meet the collateralization requirements and all the other specifications.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I'm concerned about is the collateralization requirements, is whether there is another bank out there that, because I think that's the big one. Okay. Councilor Lee Garcia, you had questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think you actually covered quite a few of them. But yeah, I understand the collateral part of it. I mean, what are the other options? I mean, have we investigated the potential of any other organizations, Bank of America? I mean, it sounds like some of the larger banks would be the only ones that would be able to provide this amount of collateral.
Madam Chair and Councilor Lee Garcia, yes, based on my past experience with the state, the 2 primary banks that I'm aware of that typically bid on these types of RFPs are Wells Fargo and Bank of America. Now, some local banks participate in regional, they've combined into regional banking organizations since my experience with the state, and I don't know if they're active in this market. But in my experience, the banks that typically have the ability to meet those requirements of state law, particularly the collateral, are the larger banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America.
So let's just say a mid-sized bank that's locally here, that's maybe part of a larger group. Do they participate sometimes in maybe, I don't know, bonding insurances or some type of federal FDIC type of stuff where, which would back up, the type of funds that are needed?
Madam Chair and Councilor Lee Garcia, so FDIC insurance covers us up to $250,000. And then beyond that is the collateralization requirement. The state auditor and the state treasurer actually recently issued an advisory about collateralization. This is something they're seeing coming up in a lot of audits, that there are issues with the collateral not being held as required. So, I think this is something that we need to be very careful about. And the purpose of the state law is to ensure that that taxpayer funds aren't subject to potential bank failures. That's why we have collateral requirements, is to protect our deposits from the risk of banks, failing.
That's good. I guess the last question I have, just to spin off on approving the contracts year to year or continuing with them, is if we, as a city, didn't wanted to not continue, are there any caveats, any penalties, any type of problems with going back and saying, hey, we went through an RFP process, we've chosen another entity, and what would,
Madam Chair and Councillor Lee Garcia, no, not that I'm aware of. I believe it would be the standard process. We would have to give notice in accordance with the termination clause in the contract. But then, we could change as long as we followed the process laid out in the termination clause.
then last question, I guess, would be, does Albuquerque use, I know we're going off of Farmington's, agreement, but,
Madam
does
Chair,
Alamogordo use, who does Las Cruces use?
Madam Chair and Councillor Lee Garcia, I can ask Wells Fargo to provide a list of their customers in New Mexico, their municipal customers. I don't have that information available, but I can follow up.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I do have some concerns in regards to, the length of term and yet sometimes you're almost kind of forced to do business because of their ability to provide the services that we need. And so, it's tough, but, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Other questions? Counselor Lindell? Okay,
Motion to approve.
is there a second?
Second,
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassidy,
Yes?
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Faulkner, Councillor Lee Garcia,
yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we are on to item O. Request for approval of amendment number 2 to item 23-0635 with Brownstein Hyatt Farber and Schreck LLC to increase the not to exceed amount by $70,000 for a new total of $292,106.25, including New Mexico gross receipts tax for legal services. And looks like I see the city attorney approaching. And Councillor Cassett, you pulled this item.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, City Attorney McSherry, for being here. I see reason for the amendment is work is ongoing, and I remember that we had a conversation around this previously, but what are I know that there are some pretty complex issues that we are dealing with in terms of Midtown, and understanding when we are going to need to utilize outside counsel for this, but also how some of the delays we've experienced are impacting this contract, and if that is part of what is happening here, because it's, especially we know for, excuse me, Aspect Studios, there has been ongoing conversation there. Is this part of why we are needing to extend this? And is this, or I'm sorry, increase the amount, as well as some of the other dispositions that we are hoping to occur soonish, how those are going to be impacting this contract as well. So I guess that was a lot of questions. First and foremost, what determines whether or not we are utilizing outside counsel as opposed to internal services? And then we'll get to the rest.
Thank you, Chair Romero-Worth and Councillor Cassett. Just to backtrack a little bit on the history, we had budgeted 200,000 for this purpose during the prior fiscal year. We spent about 100,000 and we had put some into this fiscal year, another 100,000. The outside counsel has been heavily involved in negotiations related to Aspect Studios, and we anticipate they will be involved with the next disposition agreement as well, but we anticipate that will be a lot more streamlined and a much less complicated negotiation. The Aspect Studios negotiation has been extremely complex in terms of phases and development, valuation, and protecting the city at various stages. So complex commercial disposition is not something we really had in-house expertise on. Pat Vigali is involved because Midtown is her client within the city. And then I have also been involved on certain aspects with, particularly with making sure that the policy priorities of the governing body are reflected in that agreement. And knowing that history, with the series of resolutions and all of that. So, the council have become quite knowledgeable of city and the different teams within the city and all of that. So there's been aspects that relate to public works. There's been aspects that relate to, property disposition. There's been aspects that relate to utilities and transferring utilities. So there's going to be essentially a layered number of agreements that are coming towards the governing body right now. There's a lease, and then there's the disposition agreement. And the lease overlaps in terms of time, like the timeline with the disposition agreement. So I think we're quite close with the aspect disposition agreement. And then Pat is working on the ordinance that will accompany that. So the things that are matters that are city specific, Pat is working on, like the ordinance, and she's been involved with other ordinances for dispositions of properties. So I have a draft of that. And I think actually legislative team and I are working on now. And so Nancy Long is the Aspect Studios counsel. So our outside counsel is primarily working in direct contact with Nancy on the negotiations with her client, and was very familiar with Karen's commercial terms, and then working with us on the land use legal terms and incorporating them into a way that makes work that works. So that's basically it. We are approaching a time where we think the DDA and the lease are very close to coming to the governing body. I think we're hoping October. So there's just a few terms to be worked out still.
Okay, thank you. And do we think that the additional dollars on this is going to take us into the next DDA?
Yes,
that we are going-
that's the
okay.
plan. Yeah,
All
that's,
right.
that's the anticipated plan.
And is the next one going to be more streamlined because we've learned lessons or because it's less complex or a little bit of both?
All of the above.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, and then in terms of changes we've had with the Midtown team, how is that going to impact this work as well?
Well, I think we were, the primary business terms, I think, were established before Karen left. So I think the remaining details are more things just to work out between the parties on, at least on aspect.
Mhm.
And then I I don't know who's going to be selected to replace and all that and how that would be a little bit beyond what I can anticipate.
Correct. Yeah. Understandable. Can't see the
Yeah,
future. I get that
right.
one. Okay. All right. Well, that was all. Thank you for providing more of that information there. I'm happy to hear that we're getting closer with Aspect because that was my concern, was that as we continue to delay this, we were continuing to incur these legal costs. So happy to hear that both we are close, but also that it looks like this one, at least for the time being, for the foreseeable future, will be more complicated and more costly and time consuming than the others that we have.
I think very
on
much
board.
so. And I don't think the delays, don't per se add to the legal costs. They just prolong, I think, the completion.
Okay.
But we're not asking for any legal work to be done because there's, an absence of a person.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That was all.
Other questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassidy,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we are going to go to item Q and then circle back to P. Item Q, consideration of a bill 2024-4, adoption of an ordinance. Interesting, 2024-blank. A bill relating to Marty Sanchez links to Santa Fe, amending sections 23-7.3 and 23-7.4, SFCC 1987 to update golf rates. And we have Melissa McDonald and company to answer questions. And I believe Counselor Lee Garcia, you pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director McDonald, for being here Um, I'm in agreement, you know, fees increase, especially in this time of day. I think one of the major concerns, and I just wanted some clarification on this. How do we handle accessibility by some of our local groups like high school? Are we doing it now currently? Whether it's high schools or nonprofits, maybe Challenge New Mexico, or groups that would bring youth to the golf course to utilize the services. And how are they charged currently, and how are they going to be looked at for the new schedule, or are they being affected?
Madam Chair, Counselors, this rate structure does not affect those organizations. That's a separate process. This is really just for paying customers. Those types of things are dealt with in a different way, and that is through an application process. So this is really just affecting the rate payers as they are.
Thank you. So then, like, let's just say Capitol High School, their golf team, they might utilize the country club, but the option to use Marty Sanchez, which again is a beautiful golf course. I think it's one of the best in the States, especially from in New Mexico as a municipal golf course. And so whether it's, you know, Santa Fe High, Capitol High, or any other maybe charter schools that might utilize it. And so that was just my main concern, is that currently they already are in contract with us, or they have an agreement to come out and utilize golf course for their needs.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, they have an opportunity to apply for a tournament rate schedule, and that goes through a different process than this one. It's through the city manager's office, and again, it's not affected by this legislation.
And so same would go not just for tournaments, but like practicing and things of that nature.
Councilor Garcia, I think what you're asking is there any discount for regular play from like a high school or something like that? We currently do not have a discounted rate for that, but there are rates in here that they could take advantage of. One of the things that we're looking at is expanding the 4Kids scholarships to help facilitate that they do get range balls.
Thank you. And I did see that in the legislation, I think after 3 o'clock or something, free range balls for hitting 2 buckets or something of that sort. So I appreciate you all being here for the questioning on that, and you know, anything that we can do to not exclude our local youth from having access to the wonderful asset that we have here in the city. And I don't know if maybe you can elaborate a little bit on some of the ways that we are partnering with our local youth groups, just for information purposes.
Councilor, Chairperson, Councilor Garcia, we have a number of tournaments and organizations that apply every year for some discounted rates, and those tournaments are considered on a case-by-case basis. We partner with this legislation actually does offer a new twilight rate, which is great. So there's a junior twilight rate, there's a senior twilight rate. Those are rates in which folks that are maybe in high school and that and such can take advantage of. So that rate is greatly discounted, and I can tell you in just a minute, I have to pull it up because I couldn't get my printer to work before I came. Do you know what the twilight rate is?
For juniors, junior 17 and under, $15 for 18 holes. Is that right? On Friday.
Are we looking at the new rates?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just see junior regular 18 holes Monday through Friday. Don't see anything twilight for juniors, but oh yeah, 9-hole twilight, I see it. $11. And those are consistent with the previous amounts, and so are very close to it. And so I appreciate that. I think that it's really important that we still continue to to highlight our youth and organizations that do utilize our course. And in the future, they become consistent users of our course when they grow older. So aside from that, I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions from the committee?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're on to our last item tonight, item P, consideration of resolution 2024-blank, sponsored by myself, Councilors Castro and Chavez, a resolution directing the city manager to investigate the feasibility of relocating the Soldiers Monument to the Santa Fe National Cemetery and recognizing the distinct purposes of the plaza and the monument. I pulled this item because I have an amendment I want to offer tonight. Councilor Lee Garcia also pulled this item. And as I have been doing at each of these presentations, I have been reading this resolution because I do think it answers a lot of questions that keep coming up as this is presented. And I just want to speak briefly to the amendment. So I appreciate the committee's indulgence. I think as people look back on this or as they tune in, it's just a helpful foundation for people's understanding. So without further ado, a resolution directing the city manager to investigate the feasibility of relocating the Soldiers Monument to the Santa Fe National Cemetery, and if feasible, to take appropriate steps to relocate the monument, recognizing the distinct purposes of the plaza and the monument. Whereas the governing body of the city of Santa Fe recognizes the community's need to move forward after the emotional events of October 2020, when the obelisk located in the Santa Fe Plaza, also known as the Soldiers Monument or Obelisk, was damaged and partially torn down. And whereas the city sought public feedback and a recommendation regarding the Soldiers Monument during the Culture, History, Art, Reconciliation, and Truth process, also known as CHART, whereas CHART's final report, published in August of 2022, stated that data collected over 11 months of public engagement, including dialogues, meetings, conversations, interviews, phone calls, and email communications, and the results of 2 studies indicated that the Santa Fe community is still divided about what to do about the Soldiers Monument. And whereas ongoing public division about the Soldiers Monument was evidenced in the spring of 2023, when 4 city councilors introduced a resolution proposing to reassemble it, preserving the cracks as part of history and incorporating new, more inclusive language around its base. And whereas after receiving hours of largely unsupportive public testimony about the proposed resolution, including polarized perspectives, some members of the public describing pain felt regarding the existence of the Soldiers Monument, and other members of the public describing pain felt as a result of damage to the Soldiers Monument, the councilors decided to withdraw the resolution from further consideration by the governing body. And whereas the plaza is listed on the national and state registries of historic properties, because in 1975, the city nominated the city park for that recognition with the federal government. And whereas the city's nomination was very clear that the property it was nominating was the plaza, rather than any particular object then existing in the plaza, the city's nomination identifies 1609 as the year of founding of the city of Santa Fe, when the plaza began as a feature of the city, and 1846 is the year that from the plaza, General Kearny proclaimed the annexation of New Mexico into the United States. And the city's nomination describes the condition of the plaza as altered, having decreased from 2 city blocks to 1, and now including landscaping, flagstone, walks, benches, and cottonwood trees. By contrast, in Spanish times, the plaza was once twice as large and an open expanse of packed dirt. And the city's nomination states that after 1846, upon the arrival of the Anglo-Americans, the plaza was fenced in and planted with alfalfa, then reduced it to present size, and finally enclosed by buildings on the 3 sides confronting the palace. And the city's nomination describes the plaza as a quote-unquote site rather than a quote-unquote structure or quote-unquote object. The quote-unquote present use as a quote-unquote park rather than a quote-unquote museum, quote-unquote government, or quote-unquote military. Among other options, described access as quote-unquote unrestricted rather than quote-unquote restricted, and described the significance as quote-unquote transportation, with the explanation that beginning in 1821, the trade route to Santa Fe from the United States was opened, and quote, the plaza provided the final goal for the caravans on their 8 or 10-week journeys, end quote, for traders and travelers on the Santa Fe Trail. And and the city's nomination describes the Soldiers Monument as present in the plaza, a soldiers monument erected after the Civil War, but did not identify the Soldiers Monument as the basis of the plaza's significance, nor did it identify the significance of the plaza under any of the following available options: quote-unquote sculpture, quote-unquote military, quote-unquote politics/government, quote-unquote art, quote-unquote exploration/settlement, or quote-unquote landscape architecture. And whereas the Soldiers Monument's purpose is distinct from the plaza's, the Soldiers Monument was funded by the territorial legislature of New Mexico in the 1860s and erected on federal land to recognize local veterans. 3 sides of the base of the Soldiers Monument commemorate soldiers who fought in the United States Civil War in battles with Confederate forces, including in the Battle of Glorieta Pass that allowed the Union to retain control of the American Southwest. And the 4th side originally stated, quote, to the heroes who have fallen in the various battles with savage Indians in the territory of New Mexico, unquote. This is also known as the 4th plaque. And whereas the Soldiers Monument, its plaques, and its location on the plaza have been controversial for at least the last 115 years, in 1909, New Mexico Governor Bradsford Prince publicly opposed a proposal to cut out the word, quote, rebel, end quote, in 3 places on the plaques and replace it with, quote, unquote, Confederate. In July of 1973, the city's council voted to remove the entire Soldiers Monument after receiving a letter from then Governor Bruce King that requested removal of the 4th plaque, stating that the word, quote unquote, savage was offensive to Indians and non-Indians. In September of 1973, the city manager reported that David King, the state planning officer at the time, requested that council rescind its action regarding the Soldiers Monument, and the council voted to rescind. In 1974, someone chiseled out the word, quote unquote, savage from the 4th plaque, and shortly thereafter, the All Indian Pueblo Council, quote, strongly urged, end quote, that the word savage not ever appear on the Soldiers Monument again. In 2000, the NAACP Santa Fe branch submitted a guest editorial responding to the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, defending the NAACP's proposal to remove the Soldiers Monument from its location in the plaza, noting that, quote, we have a beautiful veteran cemetery where we have many ceremonies every year to honor those killed as a potential ideal setting for the monument, unquote. Also in 2000, the Historic Society of New Mexico wrote to the city of Santa Fe's mayor, council, manager, and quote unquote people of Santa Fe that, quote, the words savage Indians excluded the Pueblo Indians who had always been regarded by the Spanish, the Mexicans, and then the Anglos as civilized Indians, and in that removal or destruction of the monument would be akin to book burning, end quote. Whereas the plaza previously featured other structures in its center, a 1992 archaeological report regarding the plaza described at least 3 prior structures: a rock sundial in the late 1820s, a pyramid that replaced the sundial 50 feet in height, erected as a quote-unquote memento of Mexican independence, which came down in 1845, and a bull ring that briefly replaced the pyramid. And whereas the city's historic District Code does not apply to the Soldiers Monument and associated structures because they are quote-unquote objects excluded from the code's requirements. Quote-unquote objects include, quote, sculpture, monuments, boundary markers, statuary, and fountains, end quote. See SFCC 1987 14-12.1. And whereas the New Mexico Prehistoric and Historic Sites Preservation Act, NMSA 1978, sections 18-8-1 to 8, applies to a city program or project if the project would, 1, be an adverse effect on the plaza, and 2, has a prudent or reasonable alternative. See sections 18-8-7 and 18-8-3, subsection C of the city's code. Whereas the city of Albuquerque and Rio Arriba County have recently suffered violence in relation to the placement of controversial monument spaces. For example, on September 28th, 2023, a shooter violently attacked community members celebrating Rio Arriba County officials' decision to postpone the county's plans to relocate a statue of Conquistador Juan de Oñate to just outside the county annex building. And on June 2020, there was a shooting in Albuquerque during a protest of a statue of the Conquistador Juan de Oñate. And whereas continuing the status quo of a plywood box surrounding the Soldiers Monument's base or reconstructing the Soldiers Monument in the plaza detracted from its use as a community gathering space, and reconstruction could be a safety threat to the public. And whereas the Santa Fe National Cemetery, located approximately 1 mile northwest from the plaza, is a national shrine to veterans. It flies the U.S. flag over well-kept grounds and headstones and monuments that commemorate the lives and services of veterans. And whereas at the close of the Civil War, the federal government established what became the National Cemetery for the reinternment of Union soldiers who died during the Civil War there. Whereas initial internments at the National Cemetery were the remains of 265 U.S. soldiers from the battlefields of Glorieta, Pulaskis, and Fort Marcy. Whereas the National Cemetery also includes monuments and memorials dedicated to groups of veterans, including several memorials honoring veterans who served during the 1800s, a memorial to the World War II glider pilots, a memorial to women who served in the Navy, and China Burma Indian Veterans Memorial dedicated to the memory of the men and women who fought in World War II. And whereas the National Cemetery's dedicated purposes and the Soldiers Monument's purposes are aligned, and whereas determining the next steps for the Soldiers Monument requires the governing body to propose a plan, and whereas relocating the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery would not adversely affect the plaza, and whereas there is not a prudent and feasible alternative to relocating the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery, the relocation would protect both the plaza and the Soldiers Monument and would sustain, if not enhance, the historic basis for the city's nomination, including the importance of the plaza's location at the end of the Santa Fe Trail and the plaza's use as a central and historic town plaza and park that is accessible to all, used as a community gathering place for social and economic purposes. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the governing body of the city of Santa Fe that the city is committed to the plaza's continued use as a city park and central plaza accessible to all, and to continuing the plaza's historic and economic purposes, featuring community gatherings and celebrations. Be it further resolved that the city manager shall investigate whether it is feasible to move the Soldiers Monument to the National Cemetery, preferably close to where the Civil War soldiers that the monument commemorates were laid to rest. I would note that this last "be it further resolved" clause was removed in the Quality of Life Committee. I do have an amendment, which is not ready tonight, to replace that language, and I will be offering it later. It does read, or did read, when it was introduced, "be it further resolved, that if the relocation is feasible, the city manager shall proceed with proposing budget and contracts to expend funds to remove the fourth plaque and relocate the Soldiers Monument, including steps to preserve, protect, and minimize harm to the plaza." I would just note that this idea was brought to me by constituents in May of 2023. They had reached out to the National Cemetery to see if this was something the National Cemetery would be interested in considering. The director here in Santa Fe said, yes, this is the kind of thing that they would consider, but that there's a federal process that they would be obligated to send the resolution to Washington, D.C. and have that federal process started and have the monument considered. We have learned from the Veterans Advisory Board that there are actually guidelines and requirements for review and acceptance of memorials in the National Cemetery. But we don't, and while there are guidelines that would be applicable to this, and we don't know for sure, what they would do, I think, until we formally ask and until that process is undertaken. But there certainly are rules or directives about accepting memorials that are considered offensive. So I would also say that this resolution has been to the Veterans Advisory Board. It's also been to the Art Commission. I think that the recommendations from both those advisory committees reflect the polarization that initially in May of 2023 led me to tell my constituents that this wasn't an idea that I thought we could move forward with because the community was too polarized. Since that time, though, the events in Rio Arriba County, where the movement to put the statue of the conquistador Juan de Oñate back in near a county building resulted in gun violence. It became clear to me that I don't think we can put this obelisk back, this soldier's monument back in the center of the plaza, because I think it presents a potential threat to public safety. So that's what changed for me, and the reason why I changed my mind about bringing this forward as something that we could consider. Let's see. I think that pretty much covers kind of my thought process. I do want to offer an amendment, which is in your packets tonight. It is amendment, I believe it's B. And this is what I'm calling a sponsor's amendment. This is being brought forward by myself and Councilor Castro and Councilor Chavez. This is a result of the things that we have heard as this has gone to the advisory committees and as we have spoken with folks in the community. We are offering, I believe it's 3 changes. Let me just roughly outline those. We heard at the Arts Commission that it would be nice if the resolution reflected that there were people who were present in this area prior to the Anglos, the Europeans, and we have added a whereas clause on page, let's see, 5, which says, whereas for over 12,000 years, people of different cultures have lived in the area today known as Santa Fe, and there is evidence of settlements dating between about AD 600 and 1425 on the Santa Fe Plaza that were inhabited by ancestors of today's Pueblo people. So the amendment offers that whereas to acknowledge a longer span of history in this area. It also offers a number of changes to convey the idea that although we don't think we need to, just find the right words, that the state process under the New Mexico Prehistoric and Historic Sites Preservation Act, although we do not think it applies at this point, we are willing to go through that process, and this amendment offers a whereas clause to support that process and the fact that we will go through it. It says, whereas conversations and consultation with state experts, such as the State Historic Preservation Officer, could benefit the city's next steps involving the Soldiers Monument, even without required involvement. It directs the city manager in consultation with what's referred to the State Historic Preservation Act, or the SHPO, to investigate whether it's feasible to move it. It adds some clauses that say, be it further resolved that if the SHPO determines that the relocation would be an adverse effect on the plaza, then the city shall hold a public hearing and accept written comments regarding the proposed relocation of the Soldiers Monument, feasible and prudent alternatives to the relocation, and steps to mitigate potential adverse effects caused by the relocation. Be it further resolved that if the SHPO determines the relocation would not be an adverse effect, then the city manager shall proceed with requesting budget and contracts to expend funds for the relocation, along with taking the mitigating steps to avoid any potential adverse effects on the plaza. And be it further resolved that the city manager shall report to the governing body. This is the last thing that this does, is requires that the city manager report to the governing body at regular intervals regarding the status of determining the feasibility, including any reports or expert analysis that are produced as part of the feasibility determination. And I just would say that the term feasibility was used on purpose. It's the biggest umbrella I could think of to encompass the things that I think need to happen in order to determine whether this idea is feasible. One, we would have to formally ask the National Cemetery if they would take the monument. It would have to go through the federal process. That cannot even begin to be started unless the governing body directs the city manager to make that formal ask. And we also need to better understand the condition of the monument, what would be required to put it back. Can we, are enough of the original pieces together or available to just stack it up again? Or are there parts that have been damaged and would need to be recast in some way? And what kind of material would be used and how would it look? And we can't do any of that work, again, until the governing body directs the city manager to issue contracts to hire structural engineers to look at the condition of the monument and tell us what would be required to put it back. I also think we need some analysis on what it would take to move it. And I would just note that I did learn from a local architect, and you can Google this, that there were obelisks of this size that were moved from Egypt to London. I can't remember the years, but it was a long time ago. And I have to imagine that even in this more modern time, we should be able to move this monument. But again, this resolution would allow us to hire the experts that we might need to tell us exactly how that move would take place, what it would cost. And again, all of those things are under this big umbrella of feasibility and would help give us information to determine whether this is an idea that could happen. And I think I guess I'll leave it there. So this amendment I offer tonight that does three monumental things. And I'm open to conversation about that. So with that, I'll leave it there. And I think I need to, we can consider consider the amendment now or later, but Councilor Lee Garcia also pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for reading the The resolution again, I think, I don't know if at the beginning, when you did read the initial, caption, I'm not sure if you did include the, if feasible, to take appropriate steps to relocate the monument, which was actually stricken
Yeah, thank you.
at the previous, committee meeting. And so just to make that clarification. Um, and, you know, and again, I think rather than questions, about the amendments just yet, because I'll have some, I am in agreement with the amendments that were made at quality of life. I've always been a proponent of, first of all, seeing what, you know, what condition the Soldiers Monument is. Just based on historical data, it seems as the only part that has been demolished or damaged is the obelisk part of the Soldiers Monument. I continue to go back to, you know, what we're trying to resolve here, and I don't know if there's anything that's really going to fix any emotional trauma that's happened on either side. And I also take a look at, you know, what is left there, underneath that, the box that we refer to as the brown box. And, you know, nobody put a chain around the bottom part, the base part of the obelisk. Nobody damaged it with a bulldozer. I didn't see trucks damaging it or things of that nature. And I'm just going back to recollection, you know, to recall events of the day that it was, you know, we had the incident in the plaza. And so to me, it almost seems that the path of least resistance from a fiscal perspective is it's there. And I would really like to see that analysis in regards to cleaning it up, either putting the obelisk back up on the top of it or not. But you know, I continue to struggle with the idea of moving it to another place, as it does really contribute to the historical aspect of our community. And I do understand, and I do realize that there is deep hurt within some groups. You know, I'm never the type of person that doesn't understand why things happen, but I also really believe that this should have never happened in the first place. That being said, I'm not a proponent of seeing more violence around it. But at the same time, you know, we've had a lot of questions over who owns the monument. We had that discussion at Public Works and Utilities. And so, you know, I'd like a clear and direct statement that shows ownership. I think these are just my comments right now in regards to the initial resolution as it stands before us without the amendments that we have tonight. And so I think from that perspective, you know, we have a lot of other issues in our community, and we're wasting a lot of our time and effort on this. And I know it's a big deal with many of our constituents, longtime native Santa Feans, and other politicized groups that are really charged with changing our landscape. And so, you know, I'm still on the fence of supporting it fully. I really want to see that there is an analysis as to feasibility. I do like that term. I do like the fact that we need to find out what can be done. But I'm still at the point where I would like to see it rebuilt back on our plaza. Those are my comments. Comments and rebuilt back, not in a way that it's controversial, especially with the plaque that has created this whole controversy over demolishing. You know, it's just created the animosity within our community. And so with that, I just really kind of pulled it for comments, and I guess we could have further discussion.
Counselor Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing forward this amendment. There's a lot of this that I do really appreciate, especially involving SHPO, given that that has been a really robust part of the conversation that the community has had around the historic impact and the role of the state. And so I think involving SHPO in the feasibility process is beneficial, and I think is a real nod to what we've been hearing from the community. So I really do appreciate that. I did vote in favor of the amendment at quality of life that essentially took us through the feasibility analysis component, and then at that point did not provide any further instruction. I am still in favor of that course of action. I was working on an amendment, and what happens tonight actually could alter what I was looking to propose or how I would word it essentially. But it did involve, these, and thank you, Counselor Romero Worth, for discussing feasibility, and that there's so much that goes into that, and that is when we're looking at that broad umbrella. I think that is really important. But that looks at, what it would take to move it, the ability to move it to the National Cemetery, or just simply what it would take to rebuild it. Obviously, moving and rebuilding would give us information on what it looks like to rebuild it. But I would like to understand what the various options are. As you stated, Counselor, it's uncertain how broken these pieces are. What would it look like if we were to try to reconstruct it in any location, and what would that be doing? So I am in favor of most of this amendment, with the exception of page 7, lines 19 through 22, which is that, the city manager proceed with requesting budget and contracts to move forward with the relocation. I would like to see what the process brings us, and what, potentially these conversations that would come through the SHPO process would bring to fruition. The other piece that I put in that I recognize that the original sponsors did have, but that did get struck in the amendment at quality of life, was that the fourth plaque would be removed regardless. That's is something that, there's two things that everybody has agreed on with this. We hate the box, and the fourth plaque isn't okay. So we can start there. So that did bring that back, that no matter what the conclusion was, the next solution, the next step, that the fourth plaque does need to be removed. And Counselor Faulkner also was co-sponsoring this amendment with me. And so, we'll be having some further conversations around this as we continue to move forward. Those are my comments for now, so I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Counselor Faulkner.
I concur with Counselor Garcia and Counselor Cassett. I think it's important that we also look at the feasibility of leaving the monument where it is. And for many of the reasons that Counselor Garcia spoke to, I don't think I need to repeat any of those. But I will be working with Counselor Cassett on the amendment to add in the feasibility of leaving the monument where it is. And then I would have to agree that I also would like to pause the city manager after we find out what we're dealing with, and not give him direction to go on with the process of removal.
Counselor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. So Counselor Cassett, when do I expect to see that amendment?
Well, I was hoping to have it today, although again, what is being proposed here, I think alters some of the language that we were looking at. So unfortunately, we'll be coming forward at governing body.
We see it. I guess we'll only see it in our packet when it comes to governing body.
Yes, but what I can request is that the moment that that language is completed, that there is, could ask the city attorney's office if we get an email alert out.
Counselors,
It was
Um,
closed. Sorry, go ahead.
Chair Worth, Counselor Lindell, Counselor Cassett, I think we're at Amendment G right now with talk of additional requests that we have not received yet. I did look at a version of Counselor Cassett and Counselor Faulkner's amendment this evening, and I had a couple questions and some pretty significant suggestions. So I want you guys to see, or I would like the two of you to see those before we accept them. Primarily just for clarity's sake about what's being proposed. And then it sounds like we'll need to modify it. So we'll get to it as soon as we can tomorrow, it sounds like.
Thank you, City Attorney McSherry. So did you just say that at this point in time, we have amendments A through G?
Requested, correct.
Okay. Before I pass any amendments, I'd like to see what the smorgasbord of amendments looks like. I mean, I don't have a lot of comments on this. I'm more than willing to move this forward without a recommendation because I don't know what I'm trying to recommend until I see all of those amendments and have a chance to weigh one against the other. So Chair, when you're ready to entertain a motion, I'm ready to make one.
Okay, and I will just note, I think at least two of those amendments coming forward are additions to the one that's here tonight. One is a technical amendment that the city attorney's office is working on. And then the second one is to add the language. I think it's very, very important that we are clear that we are removing the fourth plaque. And again, I want to just say that in the proposal to move it to the National Cemetery, my proposal is that we would ask the National Cemetery to take it with the understanding that the fourth plaque would not be there, because they do have guidelines about there can't be controversial monuments in the National Cemetery. And I am hopeful that by removing the fourth plaque and placing the monument in context to the original reason why it was built, which was to honor Union soldiers, that will strip away what is controversial about the monument. But at the same time, I have to note that where it's placed is really important to whether it's controversial or not. We have heard what I learned from the last resolution is that placing it back in the center of the plaza for some is not acceptable because of how they see it, because of that fourth plaque. It's not just taking the plaque off, it's the placement of it there that is problematic. So I think I'm hopeful that we will hear from folks who may or may not, I think I'm hopeful that we'll hear from the folks who don't want it placed back in the plaza. So far, what we have heard from are people who think it needs to go back, but there is a contingent that doesn't want it with or without the plaque back in the plaza. And we did hear that the last resolution go around, so.
I think that that's very reasonable, Counselor. And so I've already said what the motion is that I'm going to make because I want to see these amendments. I don't have any other comments. I think that the comments that Counselor Garcia made were germane to this conversation. And I just think we have to see all of those amendments to know what we're trying to move forward and why.
Okay, and if I can just do one other thing which did come up and has continued to come up, and I want to take the opportunity to have the city attorney speak to, is the ownership research that your office and you have conducted. Can you speak briefly to, because this keeps coming up almost every stop, who owns it? I believe under your analysis, the conclusion is the city owns it, but maybe you could just speak to that, especially for people who may be watching this and aren't watching, they're not going to watch every single hearing that this goes through.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Romerworth. So the city has a property manager who researches property ownership on a daily basis. Back in 2020, I reached out to him on this subject and in relation to other monuments, because there was questions by all different law enforcement agencies in relation to vandalism, including the FBI, the state, and the city. So he looked into it, he got back to me, and his conclusion was that the city owned it. We looked at it, discussed it amongst my team, agreed with his conclusions. I have provided written description of how we come to that type of a analysis and send it to all the counselors, and in a format that is available to the public if you'd like to share it. I know many of you have shared it because I've seen comments from constituents in response to it. Some of those questions say, what about these other things that were written without any sort of citations to property documents whatsoever? And if they did have a citation to the basis for their statement about ownership by a different owner, it was either that there was an appropriation from the territorial legislature that led to the monument, which is analogous to the Don Diego de Vargas statute that the council moved earlier this year. We received an appropriation for that. We receive appropriations for all different types of things in the city that become city-owned afterwards. And then the only other thing I've seen that states to why someone thought that there was state ownership was because it's a state-registered historic site. And then it's also a federally registered historic site, which is why when the FBI reached out, they said, well, we heard it's a federal monument. And the only thing we have on that is that it's registered as a federal historic site. So anything that we've been provided, we have looked at. We've looked at what the source of the understanding is. We've not found any other property documents. So property documents are what establishes legal title. The patent that we have is equivalent to a deed, recognition by the federal government of the ownership by the city in 1901 through an act of Congress and a patent of the U.S. government. It was filed with the county clerk's office, and that's what our property manager identified as the basis for his understanding of ownership. It's the same basis of understanding for the city's ownership of the plaza. I think that's all I've got. There's also a question of if I followed up with the state, with the new people in state office. I did. Max Acevedo and I went to law school together. I called him up when he started, make sure he knew about the whole issue and that I was available to provide him with any information he needed. And I've done the same for other lawyers at the state repeatedly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Are we questions on that or Councilor Lee Garcia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not necessarily questions on that. I mean, I'm following it and I do understand. I mean, it just sounds as if you end up with property that came with the property and Santa Fe ends up being the monument. That's kind of the bottom line. Just a quick clarification question. And so for discussion of maybe motion to move forward without recommendation, that means that we are not discussing this the amendment that was provided tonight.
Yeah, I think we should hold off on that and wait for the full, I mean, because there's some language in one of the amendments about the fourth plaque that didn't get into this one and it's coming on its own. There's a technical amendment from the city attorney's office. And I know there are a couple others. So I don't think it's as ugly as it seems, but it probably would be better. And I know we try to do this at the committee level, but you know, I think the chart process also had a lot of amendments that we continued to do at governing body. It's just the nature of this particular topic.
Thank you. And I'm glad that we won't be discussing that. I just make a comment that it seems as if this amendment would go contradictory to what was passed in the previous committee. And so I wouldn't, if it was being discussed tonight, I wouldn't be supporting it. But I look forward to trying to dig through the crazy smorgasbord, like you said, of amendments that are coming forward and see how we divvy it up and figure out the best path forward. Thank you.
Okay,
I move that we move this forward with no recommendation.
okay, we have a motion and a second to move this forward without a recommendation. Is there discussion? And if not, can we get a roll call?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, that is the end of our consent. We do not have discussion items. We do not have executive session matters from staff,
None at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Monday, October 7th. We'll see you all Wednesday night. We're adjourned.
Chair.